Welcome to the second meeting of CSRIC. And today we'll have a number of folks that will join on the bridge as well. But what we'll be doing is we won't have any reports for vote today. We're going to hear status reports from the working groups, and then we'll have discussion, whatever discussion we have, and then we'll carry on. So I'm going to turn it over now to Brian King, the chair of CSRIC, to begin.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So not too many opening statements from me. I think it's really a case of status updates, as Jeff said, from the three working groups that were set up. And we'll go through that quickly, so this won't be a 3-hour meeting, we hope, because we've seen the presentations here. So with that, I'll hand over to Chief Fawkes for some opening comments.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the second meeting of the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council under its 6th charter. The recent series of hurricanes and wildfires in California are yet another reminder of the importance of reliable, robust, and secure communications, especially during emergencies. The Commission appreciates your time and expertise as you examine critical communications issues and formulate recommendations to enhance America's communications capabilities. Today we will receive progress reports from each of CSRIC's 3 working groups. You are each addressing vital topics. We will hear from, not necessarily in this order, Working Group 1, which is developing recommendations to improve both legacy 911 and next generation 911 systems, including ways in which the FCC may further the transition to next generation 911. Working Group 2, which is developing recommendations concerning emergency alerting and emerging technologies that may bring new alerting capabilities, as well as examining alerting authentication technologies. And Working Group 3, which is examining threats to the nation's critical communications infrastructure and will formulate recommendations and best practices for securing networks, including emerging 5G wireless networks that support the Internet of Things. We know that your efforts are just getting underway, and there will be a lot of work ahead in the coming months. As you know, the charter for CSRIC 6 is in effect through March of 2019. We look forward to working with you on the task ahead over the next year and a half. I have confidence in CSRIC's abilities, given the expertise on this council and CSRIC's long record as an advisory committee to the FCC. You have my utmost appreciation for your willingness to engage in this public-private partnership that serves not only the FCC's mission, but also our nation. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. So I just want to quickly start with some roll call as we kind of go around the table here. So we'll start with you, Jeff.
Jeff Goldthorpe, FCC.
Suzanne Cameron, FCC.
Budge Courier, Cal OES.
Lee Thibodeau from Insight.
Kevin Gage, One Media.
Mary Boyd, West Safety Services.
Francisco Sanchez, Harris County Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
Don Brittingham, Verizon.
Susan Miller with Addis.
Travis Russell, Oracle Communications.
Shirley Bloomfield, NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association.
Okay, and then hopefully on the phone, do we have Edward Janeski? Oh, there you go. Welcome, Ed. Charlotte Field?
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Trey Fogarty? Laura Flaherty? You guys testing me with names here. Robert Gessner? Hopefully he's here. Farouk Khatibi?
Present.
Walter Magnuson? Gary Smith?
Yes, I'm here.
Dorothy Spears-Dean?
President, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Roger Stone? Tim Walden?
Yes, present.
And Holly Wyatt?
I'm on.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll progress with, on the agenda here it says we'll go with Working Group 1 first, which is usually the logical thing to do, but Farouk Khatibi has a conflict this afternoon, which is why he's on the phone. So, Farouk, I think what we'll do is we'll start with your update for Working Group 2, please.
Okay. First, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to present first. And I really do apologize for not being there in person. We are in the middle of ballot comment review of some enhanced VIA standards today, which I could not miss. So going to slide number 2, that describes the Working Group 2 objectives, which include comprehensive evaluation of emergency alerting and emergency technologies such as ATC 2.0, 5G, VIA, PBS, etc., that may result in new alerting capabilities. Also, we are planning to develop recommendation on any technical solution to support authentication of alerts through digital signatures, and that's important to make sure that the alerts are generated by an authorized alert originator that has not been modified since its generation. And we have 2 deliverables, one in June 2018 and the second one in December 2018. Going to slide number 3, we have the Working Group 2 members listed. I should point out that we have a really good, diverse group of experts who are really interested in supporting the work, including folks from alert originators, experts familiar with different techniques, etc. So we have a very good combination of different expertise. Going to slide number 4, in the way of background, I think with the opening remarks that Suzanne made, it's obviously it's critical to make sure that relevant emergency information is sent in a timely fashion to the target individuals in the affected area. There are a number of techniques available to disseminate critical emergency alert, and our task in Working Group 2 is to evaluate existing techniques and propose potential improvement, such as new capabilities or ensuring that the alert is really from an authorized source. So that's the background on the group. Going to slide number 5, the status so far has been that we had only 4 meetings since September 1st, and we are currently in a landscaping, if you will, mode. We're trying to understand what are the different technology, what are the ideas that alert originators may have going forward. So we are kind of getting presentations from the different groups, both from alert originators and from technologies. We have had presentations from NOAA, EAS, ATC 1.0, ATC 2.0, PBS, and we'll be continue to have similar presentations in the next few weeks. Going to slide number 6, we meet bi-weekly Mondays, the Monday afternoons, and we are still, looks like we will have no problem meeting the deadline of June 2018 for the first group and September 2018 for the second report. On slide number 7, we have listed the next steps. So as I mentioned, we will continue our landscaping effort for the next couple of meetings. We have a presentation already lined up for next Monday on VIA and CAP. And once we have completed that work, then we will obviously develop a work plan to accomplish the task that was assigned to us. And as part of that, we will seek Working Group 2 volunteers to lead different sections of the recommendation or different aspects of the work plan. And we will continue to have a bi-weekly conference call. Right now, I believe bi-weekly is fine. If we find that we need to speed up, maybe we go to weekly calls, but given the workload of everyone as participant, I think bi-weekly is a good balance at this point. And we will provide, obviously, status update, and hopefully the next meeting of CSRIC, full CSRIC group, we will have a better status update of what we have found and provide you with more details beyond just the status update. Before I let and see if there are any questions, I just want to make one quick personal note also. I actually would like to thank ATIS for giving us a permission to use the workspace tool they have. It's been tremendous help for us for our ability to share presentation and emails and so forth. So that was my personal thanks. With that, let me pause here, see if there are any questions, comments. Thank you.
So if we've got questions in the room, can you just flip your tent card kind of this way and we can pick those up? Okay, we have one here from Budge, Farouk.
Yes, please.
This is Budge Courier from Cal OES. Is the working group going to address the needs that are specific to access and functional needs in deaf and hard of hearing? We learned in the recent California wildfire incident that was a particular need for alerting, and just wondering if you're going to look at that specifically through this working group.
Thank you for your question. I'm sorry, was there? Oh, yeah, that was an echo from myself. Thank you very much for that question. We will definitely consider that, and as a matter of fact, as a result of your comment, we have thought about that. I will make sure that we have that in our agenda going forward, and I will make sure that discussion happens in future meetings. But we haven't started it yet, but definitely that should be on our agenda for future discussion. Absolutely.
Okay, there's no more questions in the room here, it doesn't look like. Any questions on the phone for Farouk? Sounds like not. So, Farouk, I just have one question about subject matter expertise. Do you feel like you have access to the right level of expertise?
I do believe so. I would like to see a little bit maybe from alert originators. Unfortunately, with all the events that are happening in Houston, our colleague Francisco Sanchez has been very busy, but hopefully once he comes back to the group, we would definitely like to get more expertise from the alert originators and what their plans are going forward. So the current format and the current group seems to be fairly good. Thank you for asking.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks, Farouk. We'll let you get to your aircraft or whatever you need to do right now.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up we have Working Group 1. Sorry to swap you around here, Suzanne, but with Mary Boyd from West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you like me to go to the podium or just work from here? Jeff, are you driving?
Well, I can flip the slides.
That'll be great. If you'll do that, I'll just stay right here. Good afternoon, council members and guests. I represent Working Group 1. Our entire focus is on 911, E911, and NG911. I offer this status update on behalf of the members of our working group. To start out and give you some background, the Commission identified this need based on the nation's transition from a legacy 911 circuit switch network call routing and call handling platforms to an NG911 IP-based emergency services network. Oftentimes we refer to those as ESI nets. And the core services presents the opportunity to assess the reliability and the resiliency of these networks and the functional elements that support this transition. Working Group 1 will recommend measures to improve both legacy 911 and NG911 systems, to include recommending ways in which the FCC may further the NG911 transition and enhance the reliability and the effectiveness of NG911 through routing redundancy and maintenance, and mitigate against the threats of outages both for our legacy 911 architecture and our NG911 systems. Our objectives on this initiative is that the Commission directs CSRIC to recommend actions that the Commission could take to encourage the private sector to detect or deter threats to the 911 systems before they actually reach the ESI nets. The focus would be on identifying tools that already are available or that are not burdensome to implement, and on also developing a set of best practices for carriers and 911 service providers. Additionally, our objectives include that the Commission directs CSRIC to advise the FCC on small carrier issues related to the NG 911 implementation, including recommendations on how the FCC could address these issues. This would include advice on what small carriers in a state or a region need to do to be ready on time to deliver their traffic to an NG 911 network in a compatible manner. We've also been asked to look at what economic disadvantages, if any, may impede small and rural carriers in the implementation of NG 911, and what barriers could be in place to implementation, if any, and should the Commission address those as well. Our initiatives are broken out into two task groups. Task 1 is the 911 system reliability and resiliency during the NG 911 transition. Within this, and based on our background and objectives, the working group will review existing best practices and develop additional guidance regarding the overall monitoring, the reliability, notification, and the accountability in preventing 911 outages in transitional NG 911 environments. Specifically, our work group will identify risk associated with transitional 911 systems that could result in a disruption to 911 service and make recommendations to protect them, including recommendations for the best practices, and it also includes identifying if additional standards development is needed. Working group Task 1 of Working Group 1 will also study the specific actions that originating service providers, 911 system service providers, and other entities that are in the 911 call chain should take to detect and deter outages before the 911 calls are delivered into the ESI net. Actually, that sums up to be a proactive measure. In Task 2, that is the focus on our small carrier and the NG 911 transition considerations. This one, Mr. Chairman, I might note I actually have a very strong interest in this, coming out of starting 911 systems in Texas and designing, and we had 67 telephone companies. This task in making that transition to a new environment is perfect timing, and I know from experience the small carriers will benefit from it. We are actually to study and develop recommendations for the small carriers, looking at best practices for managing the transition. This would include advice on what a small carrier operating within the states and regions need to be done in order to be ready on time to deliver their traffic, as identified in our background. We need to look at the economic disadvantages early on in the process for our country. There were cost recovery programs for many small carriers. I think through time, 20, 30 years now, laws have changed. Will be an opportunity to see if there are any impacts on small carriers, or perhaps there's actual cost savings. Another deliverable in our initiative of Task 2 is what barriers to implementation, if any, could the Commission address. And then finally, for those who may have been involved in the TFOPA initiative, the Task Force on Optimal PSAP Architecture, there was a checklist for migrating to NG 911. The Commission's asked us to also consider developing a readiness checklist for rural small carriers as they migrate to NG 911. I will do another plug for that 2 years' worth of work. Chief folks, on your website, under the Bureau website, those reports still are out there today for individuals to go and reference. They are great planning guides for that transition. So I'd encourage anybody to go to the Commission website under the Public Safety Bureau and find those reports. Our working group has been finalized. We are 20 strong. We are a blend of both council members as well as additional resources and subject matter experts. Like Workgroup 2, I think we have a great blend of expertise between 911 authorities. Mr. Courier definitely representing the state of California. We have many state 911 directors on this initiative, as well as carriers, 911 service providers. So we do have a good blend. Our group is supported by commission liaisons from the Public Safety Bureau, Tim May and John Healy, and we absolutely appreciate their expertise. The current status for Work Group 1 is we have finalized the membership. We have also established for each task, these are fairly heavy lifts in this work, I might point out. So we've divided up the task, and currently we have co-chairs identified for those work groups. Walt Magnuson from Texas A&M and Budge Courier from the state of California are co-chairing Task 1. We have opened up membership to these work groups from all of Work Group 1. Some individuals are not able to participate on both, so they're dividing up. Task 2 is led by Dorothy Spears-Dean from the Commonwealth of Virginia and Jim Gerke from the Texas 911 Alliance, both veterans in the 911 business and very experienced in working with small carriers. And our final is we have all the membership established on these task groups. We've had 2 full work group meetings in September and October. In addition to that, the co-chairs have been meeting informally to help organize the efforts. I, too, want to thank Addis for your willingness to give us a document repository and using your workspace. That has allowed us to begin managing the large volume of data that is coming in. It's also a challenge as you're working through these efforts to have one library and one reference point. So, Addis, thank you guys very, very much. We've loaded in contributions already into that work site. They include outage reports, and I want to clarify that. These are public outage reports that may have come before the Commission and some of your research efforts on 911 outages over the last several years. They do not include NORS outage reports. I want to clarify that. Those are held confidential by Commission rules, and we do not have access to those. We do have some state public data on outages that we will also use as we do our evaluations and our gap analysis for the best practice recommendation. The TOFOPA checklist has been added. I guess you guys can't tell I'm a huge advocate for that initiative. Don Brittingham. Many of us spent a long hours on that effort. But I'd also like to point out the new contribution that came in last week. Once again, kudos to Addis and the ESIF and the NRSC efforts. We had a 2-hour meeting last week. Addis delivered to us the 050034, which is actually the comparing enhanced 911 and NG 911 architectures, looking at the reportable outage demarc points. So this is about a 50-page report that has been provided to us. It is probably the most current research I've seen for looking at the network elements and what each individual in that chain of delivering a 911 call is responsible for. So this will be a valuable tool for us to use, and we also welcome other contributions that may have network data points that we can also evaluate. So we received that last week. Members of the ESIF group came in on our work group as subject matter experts. We invited them in and they presented this, so this is now an official contribution for work group 1. Our schedules and deliverables for Task 1 is March of 2018. Task 2's report is in June of 2018. Mr. Chairman, I would like to have a placeholder, please, for our March deliverable. Since we're just now getting started, that is a lot of research and work, particularly if we are writing best practices. So we don't anticipate needing to ask for an extension, but could I have just a placeholder there in case that's needed. Our project schedule on the next slide, Jeff, thank you, is for Task 1, we will anticipate a draft in January. with submission to Jeff and Suzanne and the Commission team in February for review by the CSRIC Council in March. Our Task 2 follows a similar plan of action. April would be the draft, May to the team at the Commission, and then for June, submission to the Council. Our next steps include detailed work plans within each of these task groups, including but not limited to the ADIS document. We are just receiving this, and so this will require quite a bit of time to digest all of the technical data in this. We'll also need to do a gap analysis on the 1,000 best practices. Fortunately, through the years, there's been good work in how we sort those and look through them, but we will evaluate not only the best practices within the Commission and CSRIC process, but also any other international best practices that we can apply in an IP transition world. And then the review of the outage reports. We are currently conducting weekly and biweekly task group conference calls. Those are being scheduled now. And we will provide you periodic updates to the steering committee and the council. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes our update. Any questions?
Yes, so we have one from, yep.
Mary, thank you for your comments. We are delighted to contribute to this. I think it is worth noting that we do not sit on that working group. We are there as experts. So given the limitations of the expert participation rules, we will not be a regular part of the deliberations as they occur within that working group. So I know there is some effort to resolve the complexities of that. And we have members that actually sit there, but because of those working group rules, we will not have an opportunity to review the draft, even though we're one of the major contributing experts. So I just at least wanted to note that for the record.
Thank you. I did ask, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, recognizing the Commission has established the 20 members. The team that presented the report for us last week, we kind of have them on hold, and knowing that we may need to bring them back in to help work with the task groups and answer questions. I think at this point that's the best process that we can put in place, and they've acknowledged that and stand available to work with us.
Okay, so it's noted, yeah. Any other questions or comments in the room? Okay, let's try the phone then. I think you're getting off light, Mary.
Thank you, sir.
So just before we move on then, so really the same question. I mean, we talked about the subject matter expertise. It sounds like you have access to that. But what about representatives from small PSAP carriers? Do we have enough representation there?
So we were able, Mike Pollock joined the group representing the small carriers for his company. We're also talking with some of the trade associations about perhaps other, informal sub-teams that we can vet draft language with, even though they are not official members. I think it's very important that the small carriers actually have an opportunity to review drafts. It will validate our assumptions. And so at this point, we will just bring them in as subject matter experts as needed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, last chance on the phone. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so next up we've got Travis for Working Group 3 readout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. So I am the chair for Working Group 3, which is responsible for identifying and doing risk assessments on security vulnerabilities in our nation's telecommunications infrastructure. So we've got actually 3 deliverables that we'll be discussing. We'll go ahead to the next slide, please. So we're going to be looking at current threats that we have seen within not just the U.S., but global threats as they might apply and be relevant here. Looking at providing some recommendations and best practices on how we can better secure our nation's networks, both 3G and 4G. And I think we covered quite a bit of the 3G stuff in Working Group 10 and CSRIC 5. So we'll be carrying on that work in Working Group 3, looking at the 4G and then the 5G technologies, including the Internet of Things as we go through these various threats. There's 3 deliverables, as I mentioned. The first one, mitigating security risks into wireless protocols. And I do have a bit more granular definition of that on the next slide. If you go back one, sorry. So the second one is to mitigate security risks on current IP-based protocols. And then the third, the same, mitigate security risks to emerging 5G wireless networks. So looking at that first deliverable, if we go to the next slide. In task 1, we've further defined this to examine the diameter protocol in 4G networks. And again, this is extended work in Working Group 10 in CSRIC 5. We examined the SS7 protocol, which is used in the 3G infrastructures. And the recommendation out of that group was to carry that work forward and begin examining the diameter protocol. And so that is our first deliverable, is to look at the diameter protocol and do a threat assessment on current risks that have been identified by industry in the diameter protocol, or the diameter networks, to be clearer. Once we've got those identified and we've examined all of that evidence, then we'll go forward with our best practice recommendations to the Commission. The next slide. And the second deliverable, right now, we'll probably be looking at Border Gateway Protocol. This may be extended to other protocols, but right now I think the main topic will be the BGP protocol, as we see a number of risks within the BGP protocol, which is used for internet, routing everything across the internet. So that will be the topic of our second deliverable. And then our third deliverable is going to be more towards 5G. And as we now know, in the 5G world, it's going to be some diameter, but there's now going to be a new technology introduced for signaling, and that'll be HTTP2. So I'm sure that we will be discussing HTTP2 and its relevance in terms of security threats and exploitations in a 5G domain. We'll also be looking at NFV, network function virtualization, and SDN, and the impacts that those technologies have from a threat perspective. And then, of course, Internet of Things and the impact that both broadband Internet of Things and narrowband Internet of Things brings into 5G networks. Next. So we have a smaller group, apparently, than the rest of the working groups. But I think it's a fair representation of industry. There's still some discussion going on around some more subject matter experts, which I think we have a path forward to resolution on that, and we'll be discussing that some more in the next few weeks. Next. When we look at what's going on within the telecom industry specifically, what we've discovered in the last 5 to 6 years in our industry is that we've never had to really worry too much about security because of the way we did business as utility companies. Our partners were also utility companies, and therefore we operated under this model of trust. What we've discovered, though, in the last 5 to 6 years, that trust model has been broken, and we now have rogue operators amongst us that are providing unauthorized access into the roaming ecosystem. And so this has opened up a number of concerns, and this is one of the reasons why security now has become top of mind within telecom. You'll hear the statement a lot that SS7, diameter, SIP, they weren't designed with security in mind. What that really means is that the protocols themselves are working exactly the way that they were designed to work. So this is not a vulnerability of SS7 or the diameter protocol. And in fact, this is one of the things that we reported in Working Group 10, but rather it's the way that we connect networks together and assume that we're connecting into a trusted network when we find downstream we have rogue operators and bad actors that are also getting that same connection. So in reality, they are exploiting legitimate protocols and spoofing in those legitimate protocols to get their access. So we'll be continuing along that perspective. Next. So we're having weekly conference calls right now, a bit of a rapid cadence. We may slow that cadence down a little bit as we start work on the report. Also, thank you to Addis for the repository. That's not an insignificant thing as we started looking at some of the other options for a repository. They get quite expensive. They're free to individuals. When you add groups, they get pretty expensive very quickly, and so very grateful that we were able to take advantage of that. What we have placed there to date, research papers specific to diameter. Don't want to cloud the issue because I have a filing cabinet full of research papers on a variety of topics. So I've only put things up there on diameter at this point, and I've asked the working group to share any research that they have found as well that would be relevant to the diameter topic to put up there. We've also had a couple of SMEs. We started with an individual and actually a group from Russia. This team was actually one of the first to actually expose these exploitations about 10 years ago. And their work was exposed again around 2013, and is why we now see this firestorm around signaling security. So we brought them in to share their research and findings in the diameter area, where they've become pretty renowned within the industry for their diameter research. And then to bring in an operator perspective, I asked Alexander Olivier from Post Luxembourg to come in. And Alexander, he has an interesting past. He is also a hacker who came from one of these hacking teams, but he is now on a red team for Post Luxembourg. So he presented the perspective from an operator in Europe and some of the things that they have been doing and discovering in the diameter protocol. So I hope that we can start work on the report this next week. We'll start dividing and conquering. And start getting some of that work completed as we go next. So right now our calls are every Thursday, 11 to noon. I did put out a poll this morning, by the way, for all of the members. I'm going to re-examine that time. I like to do that from time to time because over a period of time our schedules change. So I did put that poll back out again today so we can recheck to make sure that that's a sufficient time for everybody. I like dates instead of ambiguous targets, so I put a rather ambitious date. So I'm going to call this a tentative date of February the 8th as a target for a draft of the first report. Don't hold me to that date. But that's going to be our target with the final report March the 1st. Then in August, we'll have the draft of the second report with the final report in September. And then, of course, the last report coming in April as a draft, and then March. You'll know, as an engineer, I do like to take advantage of the end of the month rather than the beginning of the month. Next slide. So we also will be creating a work plan so that we can meet these objectives, dividing and conquering, dividing up the various sections of the reports amongst the members to take advantage of any expertise within the group. And so I'll be looking for volunteers within the group to take on certain sections. And then we may, as I said, as we start getting into the actual work of defining the report, drop back to a cadence of every other week. And then, of course, continue providing status updates back to the council. Next slide. Any questions?
So any questions for Travis? Okay, a quiet group. We'll try on the phone. So it sounds like, Travis, I mean, it's my question about SME interaction. It sounds like you have access to SMEs, you just don't have them fully on board yet.
Yeah, so that discussion has come up, and there is some concern about not having the technical expertise, but I think we have a path forward to that. So we're looking to resolution here over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thanks. Well, dates were duly noted anyway, so you put them up there, so we've got them noted now. Yeah, so if there's no other questions for Travis, we'll kind of move on with our agenda here. Okay, Jeff? Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks for those that joined on the bridge. Thanks all of you that were here in person. And next time we see you here, it'll be December 12th, and the holiday season will be nearly upon us. So until then, have a safe trip home, and we'll see you back in December. Farewell.